My precious child, before we begin this sacred journey together, I want you to know that you are here by divine appointment. Every word you are about to hear has been written with infinite love and divine intention, woven together like golden threads in the tapestry of your awakening. Do not let the distractions of this world pull you away from this moment, for what I am about to speak into your spirit will shake you from spiritual slumber and compel you toward the movement that will save your soul, your destiny, and your future. I invite you to subscribe to this channel and return daily, for each day I have new mercies, new revelations, and new depths of my love to pour into your hungry soul. Let your heart be still, beloved one, and prepare to receive what your spirit has been longing to hear. The place where you have been comfortable is no longer safe. The position you have been maintaining is now dangerous, and the season of remaining stationary has come to an end. It is time to move, precious child, not because I want to disturb your peace, but because I want to preserve your life. My beloved child, I come to you today not as a God who delights in disrupting your comfort, but as your loving Father who sees danger approaching your life that you cannot perceive with natural eyes. The place where you have been dwelling, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, and even physically, has become a location of peril rather than protection, a zone of vulnerability rather than security, a position that threatens your destiny rather than preserves your future. The voice of familiarity whispers that where you are is safe because it is known, secure because it is comfortable, and protected because it is predictable. But precious one, this voice has been deceiving you about the true nature of safety. What feels safe can be spiritually dangerous, what appears secure can be eternally risky, and what seems protective can actually be preventing you from receiving the protection that comes only through obedience to divine direction. I see the spiritual quicksand that has formed around the place where you have been standing. Beloved child, what once was solid ground has become unstable foundation that will no longer support the weight of your calling, your purpose, and your destiny. The longer you remain in this position, the deeper you sink into compromise, complacency, and spiritual danger that threatens everything I have planned for your beautiful life. You have been standing in relationships that are slowly poisoning your spirit, participating in environments that are gradually corrupting your character, and maintaining positions that are subtly undermining your faith. These influences seem harmless because their effect is gradual, their impact is incremental, and their danger is disguised as normalcy. But I see how they are stealing your spiritual sensitivity, weakening your moral foundation, and preparing you for falls that will devastate your testimony and derail your destiny. The voice of rationalization argues that you are strong enough to resist negative influences, wise enough to avoid spiritual compromise, and mature enough to maintain your faith regardless of your environment. But beloved one, this voice underestimates the power of gradual influence, the danger of slow drift, and the reality that even the strongest believers can be weakened by prolonged exposure to spiritual toxicity. I am not warning you to create fear, but to create faith. Faith that trusts my direction even when it disrupts your comfort. Faith that follows my guidance even when it challenges your preferences. Faith that moves when I say move, rather than waiting until movement becomes emergency evacuation, rather than strategic relocation. The danger you face is not always dramatic or obvious, precious child. More often it comes disguised as normal life, reasonable choices, and acceptable compromises. The enemy rarely attacks with overwhelming force that would alarm your spiritual senses. He prefers the slow leak that gradually deflates your spiritual passion, the subtle shift that imperceptibly moves you away from my will, the gentle current that carries you downstream, without you realizing you are drifting from your divine destination. I see how the environment you have been tolerating has been slowly but systematically attacking your prayer life, your worship, your time in my word, and your sensitivity to my voice. What once seemed like minor adjustments to accommodate circumstances have become major departures from spiritual disciplines that once kept you close to my heart. The erosion has been so gradual that you may not have noticed how far you have drifted from the intimacy we once shared. The voice of procrastination counsels delay, suggesting that you can move later when conditions are more favorable, when the timing is more convenient, when the cost is less significant. But I am warning you that delayed obedience is disguised disobedience. That postponed movement often becomes permanent paralysis, and that waiting for perfect conditions often means missing divine opportunities altogether. There are spiritual seasons when remaining in place is wisdom, and there are spiritual seasons when staying put is rebellion. This is a season when staying where you are is dangerous, when maintaining your current position is risky, and when refusing to move could cost you everything I have prepared for your future. The voice that counsels you to stay is not my voice. It is the voice of the enemy who knows that your movement threatens his influence over your life. I am calling you to move, not because where you are is evil in itself, but because where I am taking you is so much better, beloved child. Sometimes I call my children out of bad situations into good ones, but sometimes I call them out of good situations into great ones. The movement I am requiring may be taking you from what is comfortable to what is challenging, from what is familiar to what is foreign, from what is predictable to what requires faith. The place where you are may have served its purpose in a previous season, precious one. God-ordained positions can become God-forsaken locations when His purposes change and His plans advance. What was once divine assignment can become spiritual prison when you remain beyond the season of your assignment. The anointing that once rested on your current position may have lifted, leaving you vulnerable to attacks that were once deflected by divine protection. I see the spiritual enemy who has been studying your patterns, analyzing your routines, and positioning himself to take advantage of your predictability. Your refusal to move when I have said move has given him time to set traps, arrange ambushes, and coordinate attacks against your life, your family, and your future. Movement disrupts his plans, confuses his strategies, and protects you from schemes that depend on your remaining stationary. The voice of comfort zones argues that movement is unnecessary risk, that change is dangerous disruption, that staying where you are is the safest option. But I am revealing to you that the greatest risk is not in moving when I say move. The greatest risk is in staying when I say go. Comfort zones that resist divine direction become danger zones that threaten divine destiny. Your current position may be blocking blessings I want to pour into your life, preventing connections I want to establish for your benefit, and hindering opportunities I want to provide for your advancement. Some blessings can only be received in motion. Some relationships can only be formed through movement. And some opportunities can only be accessed by those who are willing to leave familiar territory for the sake of divine purposes. I am not asking you to move blindly into uncertainty, beloved child. I am asking you to move faithfully into my will, to step courageously into my plan, to trust completely in my provision. Where I am leading you is safer than where you are staying, more secure than your current position, and more protected than your present location. Not because it is easier or more comfortable, but because it is anointed with my presence and covered by my purpose. The movement I am requiring will not be comfortable, but it will be beneficial. It will not be easy, but it will be necessary. It will not be convenient, but it will be crucial for your spiritual survival and your divine destiny. The God who is calling you to move is the same God who will provide for you in motion, protect you in transition, and prosper you in your new position. You are not safe where you are, precious child. The danger is real, the threat is increasing, and the time for movement has come. But you are not moving alone. You are moving with me, under my direction, toward my purposes, into my provision. The movement that disrupts your comfort will secure your future. The change that challenges your preferences will fulfill your purpose. And the step that costs you convenience will gain you divine advancement. Move, beloved one. Move now. Move with faith. Move with me. My precious child, You must understand that your life exists within invisible spiritual territories that are as real as the physical locations you can see and touch. Where you position yourself spiritually, emotionally, and relationally determines which spiritual atmosphere surrounds you, which spiritual authorities have influence over you, and which spiritual forces have access to your life. You are not safe where you are because you have wandered into enemy territory without realizing it, and it is time to relocate to the spiritual territory where my protection is strongest and my presence is most manifest. The voice of spiritual blindness has convinced you that only physical locations matter, that spiritual geography is irrelevant, that you can maintain the same spiritual position regardless of the influences, relationships, and environments that surround your daily existence. But beloved one, spiritual territories are more significant than physical territories because they determine the spiritual atmosphere you breathe, the spiritual food you consume, and the spiritual water you drink. Every relationship you maintain positions you in a particular spiritual territory, precious child. Some relationships exist in territories of faith, hope, and love, where my presence is welcomed, my word is honored, and my ways are celebrated. Other relationships exist in territories of doubt, despair, and dysfunction, where my presence is resisted, my word is rejected, and my ways are mocked. You cannot remain in relationships that exist in enemy territory without eventually being influenced by the spiritual atmosphere that dominates those connections. I see how certain relationships have been gradually moving you into spiritual territories where compromise is normalized, where sin is minimized, and where spiritual passion is ridiculed. These relationships may not be obviously evil or dramatically destructive, but they exist in spiritual atmospheres that are toxic to faith, hostile to holiness, and dangerous to your spiritual development. The voice of loyalty argues that leaving these relationships is betrayal, that distancing yourself from these influences is judgmental, that withdrawing from these environments is prideful spiritual superiority. But I am teaching you that true loyalty is first to me, that genuine love sometimes requires difficult boundaries, and that authentic humility recognizes when relationships are leading you away from divine will rather than toward divine purposes. Your work environment positions you in spiritual territory that either enhances or undermines your faith, beloved child. Some work atmospheres exist in territories where integrity is valued, where character is rewarded, and where ethical behavior is expected. Other work environments exist in territories where corruption is commonplace, where dishonesty is rewarded, and where moral compromise is required for advancement. If your current work situation requires you to function in spiritual territory that contradicts divine principles, that demands moral flexibility, or that rewards behavior that violates your conscience, then you are not safe where you are. The financial security of remaining in such positions is false security that costs more than it provides, that steals more than it gives, and that destroys more than it builds. I see how the spiritual territory of your current work environment has been slowly eroding your moral standards, gradually compromising your ethical boundaries, and subtly convincing you that compromise is necessary for survival. But I am your provider, precious one, and I can provide for you in positions that align with divine principles rather than contradict them. The entertainment you consume positions you in spiritual territories that either strengthen or weaken your faith, precious child. Some entertainment exists in territories that inspire noble thoughts, encourage virtuous behavior, and promote healthy relationships. Other entertainment exists in territories that pollute your mind, corrupt your imagination, and normalize behaviors that grieve my heart. You cannot regularly position yourself in entertainment territories that celebrate what I condemn, that glorify what I despise, and that promote what I prohibit, without gradually being influenced by those spiritual atmospheres. The images you allow into your mind, the messages you permit into your heart, and the values you welcome into your spirit Determine which spiritual territory you inhabit mentally and emotionally. The voice of freedom argues that entertainment choices are personal preferences that have no spiritual significance, that consuming corrupt content has no effect on spiritual health, that you are mature enough to separate entertainment from reality. But I am warning you that what enters your mind shapes your thoughts, what influences your imagination directs your desires, and what entertains your spirit either draws you closer to me or farther from my heart. Your church environment positions you in spiritual territory that either accelerates or hinders your spiritual growth, beloved one. Some church atmospheres exist in territories where my presence is genuinely sought, where my word is faithfully taught, and where my people are lovingly shepherded. Other church environments exist in territories where religion has replaced relationship, where tradition has superseded truth, and where politics has overtaken spiritual passion. If your current church situation has positioned you in spiritual territory where my word is compromised, where my presence is not genuinely sought, or where spiritual growth is hindered rather than encouraged, then you are not safe where you are spiritually. Religious territories that lack authentic spiritual life are some of the most dangerous territories for believers because they provide false security while preventing genuine spiritual development. I see how certain church environments have been gradually cooling your spiritual passion, slowly diminishing your hunger for authentic encounter with me, and subtly convincing you that mediocre spiritual experience is normal and acceptable. But I am calling you to spiritual territories where fire burns brightly, where hunger is satisfied abundantly, and where my presence is manifest powerfully. The social media environments you frequent position you in spiritual territories that either encourage or discourage your faith journey, precious child. Some social media territories exist in atmospheres of encouragement, inspiration, and authentic spiritual community. Other social media territories exist in atmospheres of criticism, negativity, and spiritual warfare disguised as social interaction. Constant exposure to social media territories dominated by criticism, comparison, and condemnation creates spiritual atmospheres that undermine faith, steal joy, and promote anxiety. You cannot regularly position yourself in these toxic spiritual environments without gradually absorbing their poison, adopting their perspectives, and allowing their negativity to influence your spiritual health. The voice of connection argues that social media is necessary for relationships, essential for information, and required for modern life. But I am teaching you that connection that disconnects you from me is false connection, that information that misinforms your spirit is dangerous knowledge, and that modern conveniences that hinder ancient spiritual disciplines are costly luxuries. Even your physical living environment positions you in spiritual territory that either supports or undermines your spiritual development, beloved child. Some living situations exist in spiritual territories where peace prevails, where order promotes spiritual disciplines, and where the atmosphere encourages intimacy with me. Other living situations exist in spiritual territories where chaos reigns, where disorder prevents spiritual focus, and where the atmosphere discourages spiritual growth. If your current living situation has positioned you in spiritual territory, where prayer is difficult, where worship is hindered, where spiritual disciplines are disrupted, or where my presence seems distant, then you may need to relocate not just spiritually, but physically to environments that support, rather than sabotage your spiritual development. I am calling you to examine every area of your life to determine which spiritual territories you are inhabiting, precious one. Some territories that once were safe have become dangerous because spiritual atmospheres can change, because enemy influences can increase, and because what was once protective can become problematic when circumstances shift. The movement I am requiring involves relocating from spiritual territories that endanger your faith to spiritual territories that enhance your relationship with me. This may require changing relationships, altering environments, adjusting entertainment choices, or relocating physically to positions where my presence is stronger and my protection is more complete. You are not safe in spiritual territories that oppose my will, beloved child. It is time to move from territories of spiritual compromise to territories of spiritual integrity, from atmospheres that weaken faith to atmospheres that strengthen relationship with me, from positions that endanger your destiny to positions that ensure your divine purpose is fulfilled. The spiritual territory where I am leading you is safer than where you are staying, more protected than your current position, and more conducive to the spiritual growth and development that I desire for your beautiful life. My beloved child, there are wounds in your soul that have become chains around your spirit, invisible injuries that bind you to unsafe places, and emotional traumas that prevent you from making the movements necessary for your spiritual survival and divine advancement. These wounds have convinced you that staying where you are is safer than stepping into the unknown, that familiar pain is preferable to unfamiliar healing, and that known dysfunction is more secure than unknown wholeness. The voice of wounded familiarity whispers that the places where you have been hurt are the places where you belong, that relationships that have damaged you are still better than relationships you haven't experienced, that environments that have limited you are safer than environments that challenge you to grow. But precious one, this voice speaks from trauma rather than truth, from injury rather than insight, from brokenness rather than divine wisdom. I see the wound of abandonment that has made you cling to relationships and situations that harm you, because you fear that leaving will result in total isolation, beloved child. This wound was created when people who should have stayed walked away, when security you trusted was suddenly removed, when love you depended upon was unexpectedly withdrawn. The pain of that abandonment has convinced you that any connection, even toxic connection, is better than the possibility of being alone again. But I am here to heal this wound with the truth that I will never leave you, nor forsake you. That my love is not conditional on your performance or dependent on your perfection. That my presence is not temporary comfort, but eternal companionship. The fear of abandonment that keeps you stuck in unsafe places is based on the lie that human love is your only source of security. But divine love is your ultimate security, and it goes with you wherever I lead you. I see the wound of rejection that has made you settle for acceptance in places where you are tolerated but not truly valued, where you are used but not genuinely loved, where you are needed for what you do but not celebrated for who you are. This wound has convinced you that partial acceptance is the best you can expect, that conditional love is the only love available, that being wanted for your function is the same as being loved for your essence. The voice of wounded acceptance argues that staying where you are at least wanted for something is better than going where you might not be wanted at all. But I am healing this wound with the revelation that you are completely accepted in me, totally valued by divine love, and perfectly celebrated for exactly who you are, not just for what you can do or provide for others. The wound of betrayal has made you suspicious of new opportunities, fearful of fresh relationships, and resistant to divine directions that require trust in unfamiliar people or untested situations, precious child. This wound was inflicted when people you trusted broke that trust, when confidences you shared were used against you, when vulnerability you offered was exploited for others' advantage. But I am healing this wound by teaching you to distinguish between human trustworthiness and divine faithfulness, between earthly reliability and heavenly constancy, between temporal promises and eternal guarantees. The betrayal wounds that keep you stuck in unsafe places are healed by understanding that your ultimate trust is in me, not in imperfect people, and that I can be trusted to lead you safely even when human guides prove unreliable. I see the wound of failure that has made you afraid to step out of familiar territory because you fear making mistakes, experiencing setbacks, or facing the pain of not succeeding in new endeavors, beloved one. This wound has convinced you that staying where you are, even if it is slowly destroying you, is safer than risking failure in new places where success is not guaranteed. The voice of wounded achievement whispers that you have already proven your inability to succeed in challenging situations, that past failures predict future failures, that it is better to avoid the risk of failure by avoiding new opportunities altogether. But I am healing this wound with the truth that failure is not your identity. It is your teacher, not your master. It is your stepping stone, not your destination. It is your preparation for success. The wound of criticism has made you reluctant to move into new situations where your choices might be questioned, your decisions might be challenged, or your direction might be misunderstood by people whose opinions have become too important to your sense of security and identity. This wound has given others' voices more authority over your life than my voice, more influence over your decisions than my direction. But I am healing this wound by restoring your understanding that my opinion of you is the only opinion that ultimately matters, that my approval is the only approval you truly need, that my voice is the only voice that should determine your direction and define your worth. The criticism that keeps you stuck in unsafe places loses its power when you find your identity in divine love rather than human approval. I see the wound of poverty that has made you afraid to leave situations that provide financial security, even when those situations are spiritually, emotionally, or physically dangerous to your well-being, precious child. This wound has convinced you that material provision is more important than spiritual protection, that earthly security is more valuable than divine safety, that you cannot trust divine provision to meet your needs in new situations. The voice of wounded provision argues that a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, that known income is better than unknown provision, that you cannot afford to trust divine supply over human security. But I am healing this wound with the revelation that I am your provider, that my resources are limitless, that my provision follows obedience to my direction, and that stepping into my will positions you for blessing that exceeds anything you could secure through your own efforts. The wound of shame has made you believe that you deserve the limitations, restrictions, and dangers of your current situation because of past mistakes, moral failures, or spiritual shortcomings. Beloved one, this wound has convinced you that divine blessing is for others but not for you. That spiritual advancement is available to worthy people, but not to someone with your history. That you should be grateful for whatever acceptance you can find, even if it comes in unsafe places. But I am healing this wound with the truth that shame is not your identity, that past mistakes do not determine future possibilities, that divine grace is sufficient to cover every failure and provide fresh opportunities for those who receive forgiveness and accept redemption. The shame that keeps you stuck in unsafe places is broken by understanding that you are forgiven, redeemed, and qualified for divine blessing through my grace, not your performance. The healing of these wounds requires more than understanding. It requires faith to step away from familiar pain toward unfamiliar wholeness, courage to leave known dysfunction for unknown health, and trust to exchange human security for divine provision. As these wounds heal, your capacity to move when I say move will be restored. Your ability to trust my direction will be renewed, and your willingness to leave unsafe places for divine destinations will be released. I am not just healing these wounds, I am replacing them with divine strength's precious child. Where abandonment wounded you, divine constancy will anchor you. Where rejection hurt you, divine acceptance will heal you. Where betrayal damaged you, divine faithfulness will restore you. Where failure discouraged you, divine purpose will empower you. Where criticism silenced you, divine approval will free you. Where poverty limited you, divine provision will liberate you. Where shame bound you, divine love will release you. The wounds that have kept you stuck in unsafe places are being healed by the one who loves you enough to call you out of danger and into the safety of divine will, divine timing, and divine purposes for your beautiful life. You are healed, you are whole, and you are free to move when and where I direct your steps. My precious child, there are patterns woven into your family line that have been passed down from generation to generation, like invisible chains, binding each successive family member to cycles of staying stuck in unsafe places, remaining in dangerous situations, and accepting limitations that prevent divine advancement. But I have brought you to this moment to become a generational pattern breaker, a cycle interrupter, and a chain destroyer who will set your family line free from the curse of spiritual stagnation and physical immobility. The voice of family loyalty argues that staying where your family has always stayed, accepting what your family has always accepted, and maintaining what your family has always maintained is respect for tradition, honor for ancestors, and faithfulness to family values. But beloved one, some family patterns are not traditions to be honored, but bondages to be broken. Not values to be preserved, but limitations to be overcome. Not heritage to be maintained, but history to be transformed. I see the generational pattern of fear that has taught your family line to choose known suffering over unknown possibility, familiar limitation over unfamiliar opportunity, and certain restriction over uncertain advancement. This pattern has convinced generation after generation that staying put is wisdom, that avoiding change is prudence, and that accepting the status quo is spiritual maturity rather than spiritual stagnation. Your great-grandparents stayed in situations that limited their potential because they were taught that movement was dangerous, that change was risky, and that divine will meant accepting whatever circumstances they found themselves in, rather than seeking divine direction for divine relocation. They passed this pattern to your grandparents, who passed it to your parents, who passed it to you. But the pattern stops with you, precious child. The generational pattern of poverty consciousness has convinced your family line that lack is normal, that limitation is inevitable, and that abundance is for other people, but not for your bloodline. This pattern has taught each generation to stay in jobs that underpay them, relationships that undervalue them, and situations that underestimate their potential, because they believe they don't deserve better, can't achieve more, or shouldn't expect divine favor. The voice of false humility has taught your family that wanting more is greed, that expecting better is pride, and that believing for advancement is presumption. But I am breaking this pattern through you, beloved child. I am teaching you that divine children deserve divine provision, that spiritual sons and daughters are entitled to spiritual inheritance, and that expecting divine favor is not presumption. It is faith. I see the generational pattern of relationship dysfunction that has taught your family to stay in connections that harm them, to maintain bonds that drain them, and to preserve relationships that prevent their growth because they believe that any relationship is better than no relationship, that family loyalty requires accepting family dysfunction, and that love means tolerating behavior that damages the soul. This pattern has created a family line that accepts emotional abuse as normal, that tolerates spiritual manipulation as acceptable, and that endures relational toxicity as inevitable. Generation after generation has stayed in marriages that destroyed their spirits, friendships that undermined their faith, and family dynamics that prevented their flourishing because they were taught that movement away from harmful relationships was abandonment, disloyalty, or selfishness. But I am breaking this pattern through you, precious child. I am teaching you that love does not require you to accept abuse, that loyalty does not demand you tolerate manipulation, and that family commitment does not mean you must endure relationships that prevent your spiritual growth and divine advancement. The generational pattern of religious stagnation has convinced your family line that spiritual growth is dangerous, that religious change is rebellion, and that seeking deeper relationship with me is pride or fanaticism. This pattern has kept generation after generation in spiritual environments that provided religious comfort without spiritual challenge, traditional practices without transformational power, and familiar routines without fresh encounters with divine love. The voice of religious tradition has taught your family that the spiritual practices of previous generations are sufficient for current generations, that seeking more of me is dissatisfaction with what previous family members found acceptable, and that pursuing spiritual advancement is criticism of family faith. But I am breaking this pattern through you, beloved one. I am calling you to spiritual territories your family has never explored, to depths of relationship with me that your ancestors never experienced, and to dimensions of divine encounter that will surpass anything your family line has previously known. This is not dishonor to your spiritual heritage. It is advancement of your spiritual inheritance, building on the foundation your family provided while reaching heights they never imagined possible. The generational pattern of geographical limitation has convinced your family that they must stay in the same physical locations where previous generations lived, that moving away from family territory is abandonment, and that divine will never leads family members away from ancestral land. This pattern has trapped generation after generation in locations that no longer serve divine purposes, that have become spiritually barren, and that prevent the fulfillment of divine calling. But I am the God who called Abraham out of his father's country, who led Joseph away from his family's territory, who directed my people out of familiar bondage toward promised lands they had never seen. Sometimes divine advancement requires geographical relocation, physical movement, and territorial transition that honors family heritage while transcending family limitations. I see the generational pattern of educational limitation that has convinced your family that higher learning is unnecessary, that intellectual advancement is prideful, and that seeking knowledge beyond what previous generations possessed is arrogance or worldliness. This pattern has prevented family members from developing their full potential, accessing opportunities that require preparation, and positioning themselves for divine assignments that demand both spiritual anointing and natural qualification. The voice of false spirituality has taught your family that education competes with faith, that intellectual development threatens spiritual devotion, and that pursuing learning demonstrates lack of trust in divine provision. But I am the God of all knowledge, the source of all wisdom, and the inspiration behind all genuine learning. I am breaking this pattern through you, precious child, calling you to develop both your spiritual gifts and your natural abilities for maximum kingdom effectiveness. Breaking these generational patterns requires more than recognition. It requires rebellion against limitation, courage to disappoint family expectations, and faith to step into territories where your family has never ventured. You may face criticism from family members who interpret your movement as rejection of them, your advancement as judgment of their choices, and your breakthrough as betrayal of family values. But I am calling you to love your family enough to break the patterns that have limited them, to honor your heritage while transcending your history, and to respect your ancestors while refusing to repeat their restrictions. The patterns you break will not only liberate you, they will create new possibilities for family members who come after you, new options for relatives who are watching your journey, and new permission for family connections who have been afraid to move beyond generational limitations. You are a generational pattern breaker, beloved child. The cycles of staying stuck that have characterized your family line for generations are being shattered through your willingness to move when I say move, to step when I say step, and to advance when I say advance. The movement I am requiring of you is not just personal advancement. It is generational liberation that will impact your family line for generations to come. The patterns are breaking, the cycles are ending, and the limitations that have defined your family heritage are being replaced with the freedom, advancement, and divine favor that will characterize your family's future through your obedience to divine direction and your courage to move beyond generational boundaries. My beloved child, there is a magnificent calling burning within your spirit that cannot be fulfilled in your current location, that cannot be developed in your present environment, and that cannot be manifested in the circumstances where you have been dwelling. Your divine assignment requires divine relocation, not just physical movement, but spiritual, emotional, and relational repositioning that will align your external circumstances with your internal calling and create the conditions necessary for your purpose to flourish. The voice of convenience argues that true calling can be fulfilled anywhere, that divine purposes are not dependent on location, and that spiritual assignments should adapt to current circumstances rather than requiring environmental change. But precious one, while my power is not limited by geography, my purposes often require strategic positioning, divine timing, and specific environments where anointing, opportunity, and assignment intersect for maximum kingdom effectiveness. Your calling is not a generic assignment that can be fulfilled in any situation, beloved child. It is a specific commission designed for particular people, in specific places, at appointed times, under divine conditions that I have been orchestrating long before you recognized your assignment. The preparation you have received, the gifts you have been given, and the passion you carry are designed for a purpose that exists in a different territory than where you currently reside. I see how your current environment has been gradually dampening the fire of your calling, slowly dimming the brightness of your vision, and subtly convincing you that the dreams I placed within you are too big, too impractical, or too unrealistic for someone in your situation. But the problem is not with your calling. The problem is with your location. Your assignment is not too big for you. It is too big for where you are. The voice of fear whispers that moving toward your calling is presumptuous, that stepping into your purpose is prideful, and that believing for divine assignment is arrogant. But I am teaching you that refusing to embrace your calling is not humility. It is disobedience. Denying your purpose is not wisdom, it is waste. Rejecting your assignment is not spiritual maturity, it is spiritual rebellion against my will for your life. Your calling requires you to be around people who understand divine assignment, who celebrate spiritual purpose, and who support kingdom advancement rather than people who minimize divine dreams, mock spiritual vision, and discourage kingdom thinking. The relationships in your current location may be nice people, but they are not your people. They may be good connections, but they are not divine connections. They may be familiar faces, but they are not assigned faces for this season of your calling. I am calling you away from relationships that drain your spiritual energy and toward relationships that multiply your kingdom effectiveness, away from environments that question your calling and toward environments that confirm your assignment, away from situations that limit your potential and toward situations that release your purpose. The voice of loyalty argues that leaving people who have been part of your life is abandonment, that moving away from familiar relationships is ingratitude, and that relocating for the sake of calling is selfishness. But I am teaching you that the highest loyalty is to me, that the greatest gratitude is obedience to divine direction, and that true love sometimes requires difficult transitions that serve eternal purposes rather than temporal comfort. Your calling requires resources that are not available in your current location, opportunities that do not exist in your present environment, and platforms that have not been built in your current circumstances. I have been preparing provision for your purpose, but that provision exists in the territory where your calling is meant to be fulfilled, not where you have been comfortable, but unfruitful. Some callings require urban environments where influence is concentrated, where networks are established, and where platforms for kingdom advancement already exist. Other callings require rural environments where simplicity is valued, where community is intimate, and where spiritual depth can be developed without urban distractions. Still other callings require international relocation, where cross-cultural ministry can be established, where global influence can be developed, and where kingdom advancement transcends national boundaries. The voice of practicality argues that relocating for calling is financially irresponsible, that moving for purpose is career suicide, and that stepping away from current security is foolish risk-taking. But I am the God who provides for those who seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, who opens doors that no man can shut for those who walk in obedience to divine direction, and who creates opportunities for those who trust divine provision over human security. Your calling is not just about what you will do, it is about who you will become in the process of fulfilling divine assignment, precious child. The character required for your calling, the faith necessary for your purpose, and the spiritual authority essential for your assignment can only be developed in environments that challenge your comfort zones, stretch your capacity, and require total dependence on divine strength rather than human ability. Staying where you are may feel safer, but it will keep you smaller than your calling requires. Remaining in familiar territory may seem wiser, but it will limit your spiritual development below the level your assignment demands. Maintaining current relationships may appear more loving, but it will prevent the connections that are essential for your purpose to be fulfilled effectively. I see the specific location where your calling will flourish, beloved one. I have been preparing that place for your arrival, arranging relationships for your support, and establishing opportunities for your advancement. The people who need what you carry are not where you are. They are where I am sending you. The resources required for your assignment are not in your current location. They are in your divine destination. The voice of doubt questions whether you heard my direction correctly, whether your sense of calling is authentic. The voice of doubt questions whether you heard my direction correctly, whether your sense of calling is authentic, and whether the urge to relocate is divine guidance or human restlessness. But I am confirming your calling through the very dissatisfaction you feel in your current location, through the dreams that refuse to die despite discouraging circumstances, and through the persistent sense that you are meant for something greater than what you are currently experiencing. Your calling is under attack precisely because the enemy knows the impact you will have when you move into proper position, precious child. The resistance you face to relocation, the obstacles that arise when you consider movement, and the fear that surfaces when you think about change are evidence that your calling is significant enough to threaten the kingdom of darkness and advance the kingdom of light. The longer you delay moving toward your calling, the more frustrated you will become with your current circumstances, the more restless you will feel in your present situation, and the more aware you will become that you are not operating in the fullness of your potential. This divine dissatisfaction is not punishment. It is motivation designed to move you toward your purpose. I am not asking you to move blindly into uncertainty, beloved child. I am asking you to move faithfully into my will, courageously into my plan, and trustingly into my provision. The location where your calling will be fulfilled is not unknown to me. It is carefully chosen, divinely prepared, and strategically positioned for your success and my glory. The relocation your calling requires may be gradual or sudden, local or distant, temporary or permanent. But it will be divine in its timing, perfect in its provision, and strategic in its positioning. Trust my direction, follow my guidance, and step into the movement that will align your location with your calling and your environment with your assignment. Your calling is too important to remain unfulfilled, too significant to stay hidden, and too powerful to be limited by location. It is time to move, precious child, not because where you are is evil, but because where I am taking you is so much better for the fulfillment of everything I have placed within your heart and planned for your future. The calling is real, the location is prepared, and the time is now. Move toward your purpose, step into your assignment, and relocate to the territory where your divine calling can flourish, impact lives, and advance my kingdom in ways that will exceed your highest expectations and fulfill your deepest longings. My beloved child, now that you understand the urgency of movement and the necessity of relocation, I must give you specific divine instructions that will ensure your movement is strategic rather than random, purposeful rather than reactive, and successful rather than devastating. These instructions are not suggestions from a concerned observer. They are direct commands from your loving Father, who sees the end from the beginning and knows exactly how to guide your steps for maximum blessing and minimum unnecessary hardship. The voice of impulsiveness will urge you to move immediately without planning, to relocate hastily without preparation, and to abandon your current situation abruptly without wisdom. But precious one, divine movement requires divine timing, spiritual preparation, and strategic planning that honors both the urgency of my direction and the wisdom of proper preparation for transition. First instruction, beloved child. Seek confirmation through multiple sources before making major movements. While the primary direction comes from my voice to your spirit, I will often confirm significant moves through my word, through wise counselors, through circumstances, and through supernatural signs that validate the direction you are sensing. Do not move on impulse alone, but do not ignore clear divine direction while waiting for excessive confirmation. The enemy will try to counterfeit my voice with false urgency that pressures you into premature movement, or he will create false peace about staying that contradicts my clear direction to move. Learn to distinguish between divine urgency that includes wisdom and demonic pressure that includes confusion, between supernatural peace that confirms obedience and natural comfort that enables disobedience. Second instruction, precious child, prepare spiritually before you move physically. Your current situation may be unsafe, but movement without spiritual preparation can be even more dangerous. Strengthen your prayer life, deepen your time in my word, and intensify your worship before you relocate so that you carry strong spiritual foundation into your new environment. The voice of desperation will argue that there is no time for spiritual preparation, that the urgency of your situation requires immediate physical action, that you can develop spiritual strength after you move. But I am teaching you that spiritual preparation is not luxury, but necessity. Not optional, but essential. Not additional, but foundational for successful transition. Third instruction, beloved one, develop a practical plan while maintaining spiritual flexibility. Divine direction does not eliminate the need for practical wisdom, but practical planning should not override spiritual sensitivity. Make plans, but hold them loosely. Prepare for movement, but remain open to adjustments. Take practical steps, but stay sensitive to divine modifications of your plans. Some believers make the mistake of assuming that spiritual guidance eliminates the need for practical preparation, while others assume that practical planning eliminates the need for spiritual sensitivity. But I am calling you to both spiritual faith and practical wisdom, both supernatural direction and natural preparation, both divine dependence and human responsibility. Fourth instruction, precious child. Prepare financially for movement without allowing financial concerns to prevent obedience. Movement often requires resources for transition, but lack of resources should not delay obedience to clear divine direction. Begin saving and planning for relocation costs while trusting me to provide what your obedience requires. The voice of poverty will argue that you cannot afford to move, that relocation is financially impossible, that you must wait until you have enough money to guarantee security in your new location. But I am the God who provides for those who walk in obedience to my direction, who opens doors of provision for those who step out in faith, and who supplies every need according to my riches in glory. Fifth instruction, beloved child, prepare your relationships for transition with honesty and love. Some relationships will transition with you. Others will remain in your former location, and still others will end as you move into different seasons of divine assignment. Communicate honestly about your plans, express gratitude for relationships that have blessed you, and release those who are not meant to continue in your next season. The voice of people-pleasing will pressure you to maintain all relationships at any cost, to avoid disappointing anyone with your movement, and to sacrifice divine direction for human approval. But I am teaching you that not all relationships are meant to be permanent, that some connections serve seasonal purposes, and that divine obedience sometimes requires difficult relational transitions. Sixth instruction, precious one, research your destination thoroughly while maintaining faith in divine provision. Learn about the area where you are relocating, understand the opportunities and challenges of your new environment, and make practical preparations for your arrival. But do not allow research to create fear, practical concerns to override spiritual direction, or natural analysis to diminish supernatural faith. Knowledge is power, but faith is greater power. Preparation is wisdom, but trust is greater wisdom. Planning is responsibility, but obedience is greater responsibility. Use natural wisdom to support spiritual direction, not to contradict or delay divine instruction. Seventh instruction, beloved child, establish spiritual connection in your destination before you arrive physically. Research churches, ministries, and spiritual communities in your new location. Begin praying for the people you will meet, the opportunities you will have, and the impact you will make. Spiritual preparation creates spiritual atmosphere that enhances physical transition. The voice of isolation will suggest that you can handle relocation alone, that you don't need spiritual community, that independence is strength. But I have designed you for community, created you for connection, and called you to fellowship with others who share your faith, your values, and your commitment to kingdom advancement. Eighth instruction, precious child. Move in stages if necessary, but do not allow gradual movement to become permanent delay. Some relocations can be accomplished immediately, while others require step-by-step transition over time. Honor the timing that serves your practical needs while maintaining momentum toward your divine destination. The voice of procrastination will use the wisdom of gradual movement to justify indefinite delay, will transform strategic staging into permanent postponement, and will convert reasonable pacing into spiritual stagnation. Do not allow practical wisdom to become spiritual disobedience or strategic planning to become permanent paralysis. Ninth instruction, beloved one. Maintain spiritual disciplines during transition. Moving can be physically exhausting, emotionally draining, and spiritually challenging. The disruption of routine, the stress of change, and the demands of relocation can undermine spiritual practices that are essential for maintaining divine connection during transition. Prioritize prayer, worship, and time in my word, even when circumstances make spiritual disciplines more difficult. Spiritual strength is most needed during times of transition. Divine guidance is most crucial during seasons of change, and supernatural peace is most valuable during periods of disruption. These instructions are designed to help you move successfully, transition smoothly, and relocate strategically according to divine wisdom and timing. Follow them faithfully, and you will find that movement becomes advancement, relocation becomes blessing, and transition becomes transformation that exceeds your expectations and fulfills my purposes for your life. The instructions are clear, the direction is established, and the provision is prepared. Move according to divine wisdom, step according to spiritual direction, and relocate according to heavenly guidance. Your successful movement awaits your obedient response to divine instruction. My precious child, as you prepare to move according to divine direction, you must understand that resistance will arise from sources both visible and invisible, from forces both natural and supernatural, from voices both external and internal. This resistance is not evidence that you are moving in the wrong direction. It is confirmation that your movement threatens the status quo, disrupts enemy plans, and advances kingdom purposes that hell would prefer to prevent. The voice of doubt will magnify every obstacle, amplify every concern, and multiply every reason why movement is impossible, impractical, or inadvisable. But beloved one, resistance is not rejection of divine will. It is the natural response of a fallen world to divine advancement, the expected reaction of comfortable systems to disruption, and the predictable opposition of darkness to light. The first source of resistance will come from people who benefit from your current position. Precious child, these are individuals whose lives are easier, whose needs are met, or whose comfort is maintained by your remaining where you are. They may not consciously recognize their self-interest, but they will instinctively resist changes that threaten their security, disrupt their routine, or require them to adjust their expectations. Family members may resist your movement because they fear losing your support, your presence, or your availability for their needs. Friends may oppose your relocation because they fear losing your friendship, your assistance, or your participation in their activities. Employers may resist your departure because they fear losing your productivity, your reliability, or your contribution to their success. The voice of guilt will use their resistance to convince you that movement is selfish, that following divine direction is abandonment of responsibility, and that obedience to my call is betrayal of human relationships. But I am teaching you that the highest love is obedience to divine will, that true service sometimes requires difficult transitions, and that genuine care for others includes modeling courage to follow divine direction rather than submitting to human pressure. The second source of resistance will come from your own comfort zones. Beloved child, the familiar feels safe even when it is actually dangerous. The known seems secure even when it is spiritually toxic, and the predictable appears wise even when it prevents divine advancement. Your own emotions, habits, and preferences will resist movement that requires faith, courage, and trust in divine provision. Fear will whisper that movement is too risky, that change is too dangerous, and that leaving familiar territory is foolish presumption. Anxiety will magnify potential problems, multiply possible failures, and minimize divine promises. Comfort will argue that staying where you are is easier, safer, and more reasonable than stepping into unknown territory that requires supernatural faith. But I am teaching you that comfort zones that resist divine direction become danger zones that threaten divine destiny. That familiar territory that opposes my will becomes enemy territory that hinders my purposes, and that predictable circumstances that contradict my plans become problematic situations that prevent my blessings. The third source of resistance will come from spiritual forces that recognize the kingdom advancement your movement will create. Precious one, the enemy has invested in keeping you where you are because your current position limits your effectiveness, restricts your influence, and prevents the impact you would have in your divine destination. Spiritual resistance may manifest as supernatural obstacles that appear just as you prepare to move, as unusual difficulties that arise when you take steps toward relocation, or as demonic oppression that intensifies when you commit to divine direction. This resistance is not evidence that you are out of divine will. It is confirmation that your movement has spiritual significance that threatens the kingdom of darkness. The voice of fear will interpret spiritual resistance as divine disapproval, supernatural obstacles as heavenly rejection, and demonic opposition as evidence that you misheard my direction. But I am teaching you that the enemy fights hardest against advancement that threatens his influence most significantly, opposes most strongly movements that will advance my kingdom most effectively, and resists most desperately relocations that will position my people most strategically. The fourth source of resistance will come from circumstances that seem to prevent movement. Beloved child, financial challenges may arise just as you plan to relocate. Health issues may surface as you prepare to move, or practical complications may develop as you take steps toward your divine destination. Some of these circumstances may be natural consequences of change. Others may be spiritual attacks designed to prevent movement, and still others may be divine tests designed to strengthen your faith and confirm your commitment to obedience, regardless of cost or difficulty. The voice of circumstances will argue that obstacles are divine closure, that difficulties are heavenly disapproval, and that problems are spiritual red lights that should stop movement. But I am teaching you to distinguish between divine direction and circumstantial resistance, between spiritual guidance and natural opposition, between heavenly will and earthly obstacles. The fifth source of resistance will come from your own mind, precious child. Mental resistance includes thoughts that question divine direction, logic that contradicts spiritual guidance, and reasoning that opposes faith-based decisions. Your intellect will demand guarantees that faith cannot provide, require security that obedience cannot ensure, and seek certainty that divine direction rarely includes. The voice of human reasoning will argue that movement without complete information is foolish, that relocation without total security is irresponsible, and that following spiritual direction without natural confirmation is presumptuous. But I am calling you to trust divine wisdom over human logic, spiritual direction over natural reasoning, and faith-based decisions over fear-based analysis. Overcoming resistance requires recognizing its sources, understanding its purposes, and responding with spiritual authority rather than natural reaction. When people resist your movement, love them, but do not let their resistance determine your direction. When comfort zones resist change, appreciate what they have provided, but do not let familiarity prevent divine advancement. When spiritual forces resist your relocation, recognize their opposition as confirmation of significance and respond with prayer, worship, and spiritual warfare. The voice of surrender will tempt you to interpret resistance as divine direction to abandon movement, to view obstacles as heavenly instruction to remain stationary, and to consider opposition as spiritual guidance to maintain the status quo. But I am teaching you that divine direction does not guarantee absence of resistance. It guarantees my presence and power to overcome resistance that would prevent divine will from being accomplished. Move through resistance rather than being stopped by it, beloved child. Walk around obstacles rather than being defeated by them. Push past opposition rather than being paralyzed by it. The resistance you face is temporary, but the advancement you gain through overcoming resistance is permanent. The obstacles that seem insurmountable are actually opportunities for divine power to be demonstrated, for supernatural provision to be revealed, and for spiritual authority to be exercised. Every resistance you overcome makes you stronger for future challenges. Every obstacle you navigate increases your faith for greater difficulties, and every opposition you defeat prepares you for more significant spiritual warfare. The resistance to your movement is not designed to stop you. It is designed to strengthen you for the battles you will face in your divine destination. Overcome resistance with faith, push past obstacles with prayer, and defeat opposition with obedience to divine direction. Your movement is more powerful than any resistance. Your destination is more significant than any obstacle, and your divine assignment is more important than any opposition. The resistance is real, but your victory is guaranteed. Move forward with confidence, knowing that greater is He who is in you than any force that would try to prevent your obedience to divine direction. My beloved child, there comes a moment in every spiritual journey when you must find the courage to leave what no longer serves your divine purpose, to release what has outlived its season in your life, and to abandon what has become a hindrance rather than a help to your spiritual advancement. This courage is not callousness toward the past, but clarity about the future. Not ingratitude for previous blessings, but recognition of current needs, not rejection of what was good, but acceptance of what is better. The voice of sentimentality will argue that leaving anything or anyone who once blessed you is betrayal, that moving away from what once served you is ingratitude, and that releasing what once helped you is abandonment of loyalty. But precious one, seasonal blessings that extend beyond their season become burdens. Helpful relationships that continue past their purpose become hindrances, and beneficial situations that persist beyond their time become barriers to divine advancement. I see how you have been clinging to relationships that once encouraged your faith, but now drain your spiritual energy, beloved child. These relationships were divine gifts in previous seasons, appointed connections that served specific purposes during particular phases of your journey. But seasons change, purposes evolve, and what once built you up can begin to tear you down when you remain in connections that have expired spiritually, emotionally, or relationally. The courage to leave these relationships is not cruelty. It is kindness to both yourself and others. When you remain in relationships that no longer serve mutual growth, you prevent others from finding connections that would better serve their current needs, while you deprive yourself of relationships that would better support your present season. Releasing relationships with love honors what they were while creating space for what needs to be. The voice of false loyalty will convince you that leaving people who once helped you is selfish abandonment, that moving away from those who supported you is ungrateful betrayal, and that releasing connections that blessed you is heartless rejection. But I am teaching you that true loyalty sometimes requires loving release, that genuine gratitude includes honoring relationships by not forcing them beyond their natural lifespan, and that authentic love recognizes when holding on becomes harmful to everyone involved. I see how you have been maintaining positions that once provided security, but now limit your potential, precious child. These positions served important purposes during seasons when you needed stability, financial provision, or professional development. But what once provided security can become a prison, what once offered opportunity can become a limitation, and what once promised advancement can become a barrier to divine calling. The courage to leave these positions requires trusting that divine provision exceeds human security, that spiritual advancement surpasses professional advancement, and that following divine calling is more important than maintaining earthly comfort. This courage is not recklessness. It is faith that trusts divine promise over human guarantee, eternal purpose over temporal provision, and spiritual advancement over material security. The voice of financial fear will argue that leaving positions that provide income is irresponsible foolishness, that trusting divine provision is naive presumption, and that following spiritual direction at the cost of financial security is dangerous fanaticism. But I am the God who clothes the lilies of the field and feeds the birds of the air, who provides for those who seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, and who opens doors of provision for those who walk in obedience to divine direction. I see how you have been tolerating environments that once nurtured your growth, but now stifle your development, beloved one. These environments were appropriate for previous seasons when you needed protection, instruction, or gradual development. But spiritual growth requires progressive challenges, increasing responsibility, and expanding influence that outgrow environments that once provided appropriate boundaries. The courage to leave these environments is not rejection of their value, but recognition of your growth, not criticism of their limitations, but acknowledgement of your expansion, not ingratitude for their protection, but readiness for greater exposure. What once provided necessary shelter can become limiting restriction. What once offered helpful structure can become confining bondage, and what once gave needed guidance can become preventing control. The voice of comfort will argue that familiar environments are safer than unknown territories, that predictable situations are wiser than uncertain circumstances, and that staying where you are comfortable is more reasonable than moving where you must trust divine provision. But I am calling you to trust that divine territories are safer than familiar territories, when familiar territories resist divine purposes, that uncertain circumstances covered by divine promise are more secure than predictable situations that limit divine advancement, and that discomfort in divine will is preferable to comfort in human will. I see how you have been defending beliefs that once provided foundation, but now prevent advancement, precious child. These beliefs served important purposes during seasons when you needed structure, certainty, or protection from confusion. But spiritual maturity requires expanding understanding, deepening revelation, and growing capacity for divine mystery that transcends previous limitations of theological understanding. The courage to leave restrictive beliefs is not abandonment of faith, but advancement of faith, not rejection of truth, but reception of greater truth, not betrayal of foundation, but building on foundation. What once provided necessary boundaries can become limiting walls. What once offered helpful structure can become confining boxes, and what once gave needed certainty can become preventing rigidity. The voice of religious tradition will argue that changing beliefs is dangerous liberalism, that expanding understanding is prideful presumption, and that growing in revelation is rebellious departure from established truth. But I am the God of progressive revelation, who gives greater understanding to those who hunger for deeper truth, who expands the capacity of those who seek more of my heart, and who reveals fresh dimensions of eternal truth to those who are willing to leave limiting beliefs for liberating understanding. The courage to leave what no longer serves requires distinguishing between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it, between gratitude for previous blessings and obligation to permanent loyalty, between respecting what was helpful and recognizing when help becomes hindrance. This courage is not developed through human effort, but received through divine grace, not achieved through personal strength, but granted through spiritual empowerment, not earned through religious performance, but given through intimate relationship with me. I am giving you courage to leave relationships that have become spiritual burdens, positions that have become divine limitations, environments that have become growth restrictions, and beliefs that have become advancement barriers. This courage includes wisdom to leave with love rather than anger, grace to release with blessing rather than bitterness, and faith to trust that divine replacement exceeds human retention. The courage to leave what no longer serves is actually courage to embrace what will serve better, to receive what will bless more, and to enter what will advance your divine purposes more effectively. Leaving is not loss when it creates space for gain, not abandonment when it enables advancement, not rejection when it allows reception of greater blessing. You have courage to leave what no longer serves, beloved child, because you have faith to receive what will serve better. You have strength to release what has expired, because you have hope for what is being prepared. You have grace to move away from what was good, because you have trust in what will be great. The courage is yours, the strength is available, and the time is now. Leave what no longer serves with gratitude for what it provided, with blessing for what it accomplished, and with faith for what is coming to replace it. Your divine future requires divine courage to leave divine past for divine advancement. My precious child, the movement I am requiring of you is not merely natural relocation that depends on human strength, practical planning, and earthly resources. This is divine transition that requires supernatural empowerment, heavenly assistance, and spiritual authority that transcends natural ability and human limitation. I am releasing into your life extraordinary power for extraordinary movement that will accomplish divine purposes through supernatural means. The voice of natural limitation will convince you that movement depends entirely on your resources, your abilities, and your connections, that relocation requires only practical planning and human effort, and that transition is accomplished through natural means alone. But beloved one, divine movement requires divine power. Spiritual relocation demands spiritual authority, and supernatural transition necessitates supernatural empowerment that exceeds anything you could accomplish through human effort alone. I am empowering your faith to believe for movements that seem impossible from natural perspective, relocations that appear impractical from human viewpoint, and transitions that look unreasonable from earthly analysis. This empowered faith does not ignore practical realities, but transcends practical limitations, does not deny natural obstacles but overcomes natural barriers, and does not dismiss earthly concerns, but operates from heavenly authority that makes earthly impossibilities become spiritual possibilities. When Abraham was called to leave his father's country, he was empowered with supernatural faith to step into unknown territory, trusting divine promise over human security. When Moses was directed to lead Israel out of Egypt, he was empowered with supernatural authority to confront earthly powers with heavenly mandate. When Jesus began his ministry, he was empowered with supernatural anointing to fulfill divine assignment through supernatural demonstration of divine power. The same supernatural empowerment that enabled their divine transitions is available for your divine movement, precious child. This empowerment is not earned through religious performance, but received through spiritual surrender, not achieved through human effort, but granted through divine grace, not accumulated through personal discipline, but released through intimate relationship with me. I am empowering your prayers with supernatural authority that will remove obstacles, open doors, and create opportunities for successful transition. Your prayers during this season of movement are not just requests for divine help. They are declarations of spiritual authority that command circumstances to align with divine will, that require situations to cooperate with heavenly purposes, and that demand environments to prepare for your arrival. The voice of powerless praying will convince you that prayer is simply asking for divine favor while hoping for positive response, that intercession is merely presenting requests while waiting for possible answer, and that spiritual authority is reserved for special people with exceptional anointing. But I am teaching you that prayer is partnership with divine power, that intercession is exercise of spiritual authority, and that every believer who walks in obedience to divine direction has access to supernatural empowerment for divine assignments. I am empowering your words with creative authority that will speak life into your transition, blessing into your movement, and success into your relocation. When you declare my promises over your movement, when you speak my word over your transition, when you proclaim divine truth over your circumstances, your words carry creative power that actively works to manifest what you declare in faith. Your words are not just expressions of hope, but instruments of change. Not just communications of desire, but tools of transformation. Not just declarations of intent, but weapons of warfare that defeat obstacles, overcome resistance, and create pathways for divine advancement. The empowerment I am releasing enables your words to carry supernatural weight that moves mountains, changes circumstances, and opens doors that no human effort could unlock. I am empowering your worship with supernatural effectiveness that creates atmospheres where divine intervention manifests, where heavenly resources are released, and where spiritual breakthrough occurs naturally. Worship during transition is not just emotional expression, but spiritual warfare, not just personal blessing, but environmental transformation, not just individual experience, but atmospheric alteration that makes divine movement easier, supernatural provision more accessible, and spiritual breakthrough more likely. The voice of religious routine will reduce worship to songs sung and prayers prayed, to rituals performed and emotions expressed, to activities completed and duties fulfilled. But I am empowering your worship to become supernatural force that changes spiritual atmospheres, alters natural circumstances, and releases divine power into earthly situations through the supernatural authority of authentic praise offered by surrendered hearts. I am empowering your giving with supernatural multiplication that will provide resources for transition, create opportunities for advancement, and establish favor for successful relocation. Seeds sown during seasons of movement carry special anointing for harvest. Offerings given during times of transition attract divine provision, and generosity expressed during periods of change positions you for divine blessing that exceeds natural expectation. When you give while preparing to move, you are not just supporting ministry, you are planting seeds for your harvest. When you offer while transitioning, you are not just fulfilling obligation, you are positioning yourself for multiplication. When you sow while relocating, you are not just expressing obedience, you are activating supernatural provision that will supply every need related to your divine movement. I am empowering your relationships with supernatural wisdom that will help you discern which connections should transition with you, which relationships should remain in your former location, and which new connections await you in your divine destination. This empowered discernment protects you from carrying relationships that would hinder your advancement while ensuring you maintain connections that will support your purposes. Some relationships are seasonal and will naturally conclude as you move into new assignments. Others are permanent and will continue regardless of geographical separation. Still others are future and will begin as you arrive in your divine destination. Supernatural empowerment enables you to navigate these relational transitions with wisdom, grace, and love that honors past connections while embracing future opportunities. I am empowering your courage with supernatural boldness that will enable you to make difficult decisions, take costly steps, and embrace uncomfortable transitions that serve eternal purposes rather than temporal comfort. This empowered courage is not human bravery that depends on favorable circumstances, but divine boldness that operates through faith in divine promise, trust in divine provision, and confidence in divine protection. The voice of human courage will fluctuate with circumstances, weaken under pressure, and fail during challenging seasons. But supernatural courage is rooted in divine character that never changes, anchored in divine promises that never fail, and empowered by divine love that never abandons. This courage enables movement that honors divine direction regardless of cost, embraces divine will despite difficulty, and follows divine guidance through uncertainty. The supernatural empowerment I am releasing will not eliminate all challenges, but will provide divine strength for every challenge, will not remove all obstacles, but will supply heavenly wisdom for every obstacle, will not prevent all difficulties, but will grant spiritual authority for every difficulty. You will move not in your strength, but in my strength, not through your ability, but through my ability, not by your power, but by my power working through your surrendered and obedient heart. Receive this supernatural empowerment, beloved child. Embrace the divine authority available for your transition. Walk in the spiritual power provided for your movement. You are not relocating in natural strength alone. You are moving in supernatural empowerment that guarantees divine success, ensures heavenly provision, and accomplishes eternal purposes through your obedient response to divine direction. The empowerment is yours, the authority is established, and the power is released. Move in supernatural strength, transition with divine assistance, and relocate with heavenly empowerment that exceeds your natural ability and accomplishes divine purposes beyond your highest expectations. My beloved child, as you move through this season of divine transition, you must understand that you are not relocating as a powerless victim of circumstances, but as an authorized agent of heaven, not moving as a desperate refugee seeking safety, but as an empowered ambassador carrying divine assignment, not transitioning as an uncertain wanderer, but as an authorized representative of kingdom purposes, advancing through strategic relocation. The voice of powerlessness will convince you that transition makes you vulnerable, that movement strips you of authority, and that relocation reduces you to dependent status where you must beg for acceptance, plead for opportunity, and hope for favor. But precious one, divine transition actually increases your authority because it demonstrates your obedience to divine direction, proves your willingness to trust divine provision, and positions you for greater spiritual responsibility and kingdom influence. Your authority during transition is not based on your familiarity with new environments, your connections in unfamiliar territories, or your established reputation in unknown locations. Your authority flows from your relationship with me, your obedience to divine direction, and your position as my beloved child who carries divine assignment wherever you go, divine favor wherever you relocate, and divine purpose wherever you transition. When you understand that you move with divine authority, transition becomes advance rather than retreat, relocation becomes strategy rather than survival, and movement becomes positioning rather than displacement. You are not running from something. You are advancing towards something. You are not escaping problems. You are embracing purposes. You are not abandoning failure. You are approaching fulfillment. I am establishing your authority over the spiritual atmosphere of your transition, precious child. You have power to create environments of faith wherever you go, to establish territories of blessing wherever you relocate, and to manifest zones of divine presence wherever you settle. Your arrival in any location is not just personal movement, but spiritual advance that brings light into darkness, hope into despair, and divine possibility into human limitation. The voice of intimidation will try to convince you that you must earn acceptance in new environments, that you must prove your worth in unfamiliar territories, and that you must establish credibility through human effort in unknown locations. But I am teaching you that divine authority precedes human approval, that spiritual credibility, exceeds human recognition, and that kingdom influence surpasses earthly acceptance. You carry with you the authority to speak peace over chaos, to declare blessing over barrenness, and to proclaim breakthrough over barriers. Your words during transition are not powerless expressions of hope, but authoritative declarations of divine will, not weak requests for favor, but strong commands for alignment with heavenly purposes, not uncertain prayers for help, but confident exercises of spiritual authority. I am establishing your authority over financial provision during transition, beloved one. You are not at the mercy of economic circumstances, not dependent on human generosity, and not limited by natural resources. You have authority to release divine provision through obedient giving, to attract supernatural supply through faithful stewardship, and to manifest heavenly resources through spiritual principles that transcend earthly limitations. When you operate in divine authority during transition, doors of provision open that human effort could not unlock, opportunities appear that natural planning could not create, and resources become available that earthly strategy could not secure. Your authority over provision is not presumption, it is promise. It is not arrogance, it is assignment. It is not fantasy, it is faith based on divine word and confirmed by divine character. The voice of poverty will argue that transition creates financial vulnerability, that movement depletes resources, and that relocation requires dependence on uncertain provision. But I am teaching you that obedient movement positions you for divine provision, that faithful transition attracts supernatural supply, and that authorized relocation releases heavenly resources that exceed anything you could accumulate through human effort alone. I am establishing your authority over relationships during transition, precious child. You are not desperate for acceptance, not dependent on others' approval, and not limited by human connection. You have authority to attract divine relationships, to recognize assigned connections, and to establish meaningful bonds that serve kingdom purposes rather than merely meeting human needs. Your authority over relationships means you can love from strength rather than neediness, serve from fullness rather than emptiness, and connect from security rather than desperation. This authority attracts healthy relationships while repelling toxic connections, draws supportive people while deterring destructive influences, and establishes beneficial bonds while preventing harmful attachments. The voice of loneliness will try to convince you that transition means isolation, that movement results in separation, and that relocation requires accepting whatever relationships are available regardless of their health or helpfulness. But divine authority during transition includes supernatural ability to discern which relationships serve divine purposes, to attract connections that support spiritual advancement, and to establish bonds that enhance rather than hinder kingdom effectiveness. I am establishing your authority over your emotional responses during transition, beloved child. Change can be emotionally challenging, movement can create stress, and relocation can trigger anxiety, fear, or depression. But you have authority over your emotional responses, power to choose peace over panic, and ability to maintain joy despite difficulty, hope despite uncertainty, and faith despite challenges. This authority over emotions is not denial of feelings, but direction of feelings, not suppression of reactions, but transformation of reactions, not elimination of struggles, but victory over struggles. You can acknowledge difficult emotions while refusing to be controlled by them, experience challenging feelings while choosing responses that align with divine truth rather than emotional impulse. I am establishing your authority over opposition during transition, precious one. Resistance to your movement is inevitable, but defeat by that resistance is optional. You have authority to overcome obstacles, to navigate challenges, and to triumph over every force that would try to prevent, pervert, or postpone your obedience to divine direction. This authority over opposition includes supernatural wisdom to distinguish between resistance that should be overcome and signals that should be heeded, between obstacles that should be conquered and warnings that should be considered, between opposition that should be defeated and guidance that should be received. Not every difficulty is spiritual warfare, but every spiritual attack can be defeated through spiritual authority. The voice of defeat will magnify every obstacle, amplify every challenge, and multiply every reason why your transition will fail. But divine authority during transition includes supernatural ability to minimize obstacles through faith, to overcome challenges through spiritual power, and to silence voices of defeat through declarations of divine truth and promises of heavenly victory. I am establishing your authority over timing during transition, beloved child. You are not at the mercy of circumstances that seem to delay your movement, not controlled by situations that appear to prevent your relocation, and not limited by conditions that seem to postpone your advancement. You have authority to discern divine timing, to recognize supernatural seasons, and to move when heaven says move regardless of earthly conditions. This authority over timing includes wisdom to distinguish between divine delays that serve preparation purposes and enemy delays that serve prevention purposes, between heavenly pacing that serves development and human postponement that serves fear, between spiritual seasons that require patience and natural circumstances that require authority. Your authority during transition is not independent of divine will, but flowing from divine will. Not separate from divine purpose, but serving divine purpose, not competing with divine plan, but cooperating with divine plan. The more closely you align with my will, the more authority you carry. The more completely you surrender to my purposes, the more power flows through your life. The more fully you trust my direction, the more effectively you exercise spiritual authority. Walk in your divine authority during transition, precious child. You are not powerless. You are empowered. You are not vulnerable. You are protected. You are not dependent. You are authorized. You are not at the mercy of circumstances. You have authority over circumstances through faith in divine promises and obedience to divine direction. The authority is real, the power is available, and the victory is assured. Move with confidence in divine authority, transition with certainty of divine empowerment, and relocate with assurance of divine success. You are not just moving, you are advancing. You are not just relocating, you are positioning. You are not just transitioning, you are conquering new territory for kingdom purposes. Your transition is not just personal movement, but spiritual advance. Not just individual relocation, but kingdom expansion. Not just human change, but divine strategy. Walk in the authority that makes every transition a triumph, every movement a victory, and every relocation a conquest for the glory of God and the advancement of His kingdom purposes through your obedient life. My precious child, as you have journeyed through this process of recognizing danger, embracing movement, and following divine direction toward safer territory, something magnificent has been occurring within your spirit that transcends mere physical relocation or circumstantial change. You have been transformed by the courage to move, refined by the faith to trust, and strengthened by the willingness to leave familiar territory for divine territory. This transformation is not just preparation for your destination, it is the beautiful fruit of obedient movement itself. The voice of sameness will try to convince you that you are still the person you were before this journey began, that movement has not really changed you, that relocation is only external adjustment without internal transformation. But beloved one, you are not who you were when you first heard my call to move. The courage required to leave unsafe places has created character that cannot be shaken. The faith necessary to trust divine direction has built spiritual muscle that cannot be weakened, and the obedience demanded by divine movement has developed intimacy with me that cannot be broken. Your relationship with fear has been completely revolutionized through this journey, precious child. Where once you were paralyzed by uncertainty, You now possess supernatural peace that enables movement despite unknown outcomes. Where once you were controlled by anxiety about future provision, you now carry unshakable confidence in divine supply. Where once you were dominated by terror of change, you now embrace transformation as evidence of divine activity in your life. This transformation in your fear response has liberated you from prisons of paralysis, released you from bondage of anxiety, and freed you from slavery to security that prevented spiritual advancement. You have learned that perfect love casts out fear, that divine direction includes divine protection, and that obedient movement positions you for blessing rather than exposing you to unnecessary danger. The transformation in your faith has been extraordinary, beloved one. Faith that was once theoretical has become practical. Trust that was once occasional has become constant. And confidence that was once conditional has become unconditional. You have moved from knowing about divine faithfulness to experiencing divine faithfulness. From believing in divine provision to receiving divine provision. From hoping in divine protection to walking in divine protection. Your faith has been tested by the fire of movement and proven genuine through the crucible of transition. This refined faith now serves as unshakable foundation for future challenges, immovable anchor for future storms, and reliable compass for future directions. The faith developed through movement will serve you for the rest of your life, enabling future obedience to divine direction regardless of cost or difficulty. The voice of limitation that once whispered you were too weak, too inadequate, or too unqualified for divine assignment has been silenced by the evidence of your successful movement in response to divine direction. You have discovered that you are stronger than you thought, more capable than you believed, and more qualified than you assumed when divine empowerment flows through surrendered hearts. Your understanding of divine provision has been revolutionized through this journey, precious child. Where once you trusted primarily in human security, earthly resources, and natural provision, you now know experientially that divine supply exceeds human limitation, that heavenly resources surpass earthly accumulation, and that supernatural provision transcends natural planning. You have learned that obedient movement positions you for provision you could never secure through human effort, that faithful transition attracts resources you could never accumulate through earthly strategy, and that trusting divine direction opens doors of opportunity you could never unlock through natural networking. This understanding has liberated you from anxiety about provision and freed you to follow divine direction without fear of financial insecurity. The transformation in your decision-making process has been profound, beloved one. Where once you made choices based primarily on comfort, convenience, and human approval, you now make decisions based on divine will, eternal purpose, and kingdom advancement. Where once you avoided difficulty and embraced ease, you now choose divine direction regardless of cost and follow heavenly guidance despite challenge. This transformed decision-making process reflects matured spiritual priorities, refined value systems, and elevated understanding of what truly matters in life. You now measure decisions by eternal impact rather than temporal comfort, by spiritual significance rather than material benefit, by divine approval rather than human acceptance. Your capacity for spiritual warfare has been dramatically increased through this journey of movement, precious child. Learning to overcome resistance to divine direction has equipped you for every future battle, developing skills in spiritual warfare that will serve you in all areas of life. You have learned to recognize enemy tactics, resist spiritual opposition, and triumph over forces that would prevent divine advancement. The spiritual authority developed through obedient movement has prepared you for greater battles, more significant assignments, and increased kingdom responsibility. The weapons you have learned to wield, the prayers you have learned to pray, and the faith you have learned to exercise during transition will serve you powerfully in your divine destination. The transformation in your relationships has been beautiful to witness, beloved one. You have learned to love without clinging, to serve without controlling, and to connect without compromising divine direction for human approval. You have discovered that healthy relationships support divine movement rather than prevent it. That authentic love encourages obedience to divine will rather than demanding conformity to human preferences. This transformed approach to relationships has liberated you from codependency, released you from people-pleasing bondage, and freed you to love from strength rather than neediness. The relationships that remain after your movement are stronger, healthier, and more supportive than those that could not survive your obedience to divine direction. Your understanding of divine love has been deepened through this journey, precious child. You have experienced love that calls you out of comfort for your protection, that disrupts your security for your advancement, that challenges your preferences for your blessing. This is not cruel love that enjoys your discomfort, but perfect love that desires your highest good, even when it requires difficult transitions. You now know that divine love is not permissive acceptance of anything you choose, but passionate commitment to your divine destiny that sometimes requires difficult directions. This understanding has matured your relationship with me from childish expectation of constant comfort to mature appreciation of divine wisdom that serves eternal purposes rather than temporal preferences. The voice of the past will try to make you forget the transformation that has occurred, to minimize the growth that has taken place, and to convince you that movement has not really changed you significantly. But I want you to remember who you were when this journey began and celebrate who you have become through courageous response to divine direction. You are transformed, beloved child. You are not the same person who was stuck in unsafe places, paralyzed by fear, or limited by human security. You are now someone who moves when I say move, trusts when I say trust, and follows when I say follow. You are someone who chooses divine will over human comfort, eternal purpose over temporal security, and heavenly direction over earthly convenience. This transformation is permanent, not temporary. It is character change, not circumstantial adjustment. It is spiritual development, not mere geographical relocation. The person you have become through movement will continue to grow, develop, and mature in your divine destination. But the foundation has been laid through the courage to leave unsafe places and trust divine direction for your life. You are transformed by divine movement, refined by divine transition, and strengthened by divine relocation. The journey has changed you in beautiful ways that will serve you for the rest of your life and position you for greater adventures in divine will, deeper experiences of divine love, and more significant expressions of divine purpose through your surrendered and obedient heart. My beloved child, as we reach the culmination of this divine journey from unsafe places to divine destination, I want to lift your vision beyond temporary relocation to eternal destination, beyond earthly movement to heavenly arrival, beyond human safety to divine security that transcends time and circumstance. The movement I have required of you in this earthly realm is preparation for the ultimate movement that awaits every faithful child, the transition from temporal existence to eternal glory, from earthly danger to heavenly safety, from human limitation to divine perfection. The voice of temporal thinking limits your understanding to earthly relocation, physical movement, and circumstantial change. But precious one, every act of obedience to divine direction in this life is preparation for ultimate obedience that will transition you from earth to heaven. Every movement away from unsafe places prepares you for final movement into absolute safety, and every step of faith in temporal circumstances develops trust for eternal transition. Your willingness to move when I said move in earthly matters demonstrates readiness for ultimate movement when I call you home to glory. Your courage to leave familiar territory for divine territory proves preparation for leaving temporal existence for eternal reality. Your faith to trust divine direction, despite uncertainty, reveals character that will embrace heavenly transition despite mystery surrounding eternal experience. The transformation you have experienced through earthly movement is preparation for ultimate transformation, that occurs when mortality puts on immortality, when corruption puts on incorruption, when temporal limitation gives way to eternal freedom. The courage developed through earthly transition prepares you for heavenly transition. The faith refined through temporal movement strengthens you for eternal relocation, and the trust built through earthly obedience equips you for ultimate surrender to divine will. In your eternal destination, there will be no more danger, no more need for movement away from unsafe places, no more requirement for protective relocation. The safety you have been seeking through earthly movement will be perfectly and permanently realized in heavenly arrival, where no enemy can threaten, no danger can approach, and no harm can touch those who dwell in divine presence forever. The voice of fear that has been silenced through your earthly journey of movement will be eternally eliminated in heavenly destination, where perfect love reigns completely, where divine protection is absolute, and where safety is not threatened by any force that could disturb eternal peace. The anxiety about provision that has been healed through trusting divine supply will be forever resolved in heavenly abundance where need does not exist and lack is impossible. Your eternal destination includes reunion with loved ones who have preceded you in faith, fellowship with saints who have completed their earthly journey of movement and transition, and communion with those who have already arrived at ultimate safety in divine presence. The relationships that supported your earthly movement will be perfected in heavenly fellowship. The connections that encouraged your temporal transition will be enhanced in eternal community. But most significantly, beloved child, your eternal destination includes perfect fellowship with me in dimensions of intimacy and communion that exceed anything possible during earthly existence. The relationship developed through earthly obedience to divine direction will blossom into eternal companionship, characterized by perfect understanding, complete acceptance, and boundless love without any barriers that currently limit full revelation of divine glory. The voice of unworthiness will try to make you doubt your qualification for such glorious destination, to question whether someone who has made mistakes deserves eternal safety, to wonder whether past failures disqualify you from future glory. But your eternal destination is not based on perfect earthly movement, but on perfect divine love, not on flawless obedience to every direction, but on faithful response to divine grace. Not on earning eternal safety, but on receiving eternal security through divine provision. Your eternal safety is guaranteed not by your performance but by divine promise, not by your perfection, but by Christ's perfection credited to your account, not by your worthiness, but by divine worthiness that covers your unworthiness with perfect righteousness. The movement required for eternal destination is not physical relocation, but spiritual reception of divine grace through faith in divine provision for eternal security. In eternity, you will understand fully why every earthly movement was necessary, why every temporal transition served eternal purposes, and why every act of obedience to divine direction contributed to preparation for ultimate destination. You will see how present movements positioned you for eternal arrival, how current transitions prepared you for heavenly reception, and how temporal obedience qualified you for eternal reward. The danger you faced in unsafe places will seem insignificant compared to eternal security you will enjoy in divine presence. The courage required for earthly movement will pale in comparison to the joy of heavenly arrival. The faith necessary for temporal transition will be overwhelmed by the reality of eternal fellowship, with perfect love that never fails, never disappoints, and never requires further movement because it is ultimate destination. Your eternal destination includes not just safety from danger, but participation in divine glory, not just protection from harm, but partnership in divine purposes, not just security from threat, but service in divine kingdom, where your faithfulness is rewarded with increased responsibility, greater authority, and expanded influence in realms that exceed earthly imagination. The voice of limitation will try to minimize your eternal significance, to suggest that heaven is merely escape from earthly problems, rather than advance to heavenly purposes. to imply that eternal destination is passive rest rather than active service in dimensions of reality that transcend current understanding. But your eternal destination includes continued growth, expanded service, and increased impact in realms where limitation does not exist and potential is unlimited. Every person whose life you have touched through earthly obedience to divine direction will be part of your eternal celebration. Every soul that has been blessed by your willingness to move when I said move will contribute to your heavenly reward. Every life that has been impacted by your courage to leave unsafe places will participate in your eternal joy as you realize the full significance of temporal obedience for eternal purposes. Your eternal destination is not distant future hope, but present reality that begins the moment you surrender completely to divine love, receive fully divine grace, and trust eternally divine promise for your ultimate safety and security. Eternal life is not just endless duration, but divine quality that transforms temporal existence into foretaste of heavenly reality, even while you remain in earthly circumstances. The movement from unsafe places to divine destination that you have experienced temporally is picture of ultimate movement from fallen world to perfect kingdom, from mortal existence to immortal reality, from earthly limitation to heavenly freedom. Your willingness to move when I said move in earthly matters proves readiness for ultimate movement when I call you to eternal destination. You are safe, beloved child, not just in earthly destination, but in eternal destination. Not just temporarily protected, but eternally secure. Not just momentarily provided for, but everlastingly supplied. Your ultimate destination is not uncertain future, but guaranteed promise, based on divine character that cannot lie, divine love that cannot fail, and divine faithfulness that cannot be shaken. The danger is past, the movement is complete, and the destination is secured. You have moved from unsafe places to divine safety, from temporal threat to eternal security, from earthly limitation to heavenly freedom. Your journey of movement has prepared you for ultimate arrival at eternal destination, where safety is permanent, security is absolute, and divine love reigns forever. This is my promise to you, my declaration over you, and my guarantee for you, not just for time, but for eternity, not just for earth, but for heaven, not just for now, but forever. You are safe in divine destination that exceeds every earthly hope and fulfills every heavenly promise. Welcome to your ultimate destination, precious child. You are home, you are safe, and you are loved forever.